In this video, we're going to be looking at section 1.7, which goes over sign and size and looking at integer operations. So this will start on page 51 of your note packet. As you progress through this section, consider the following questions. When calculating with sign numbers, do you know if the result should be positive or negative? Do you know why a result is positive or negative? And do you know when parentheses are necessary and when they are not? We're going to skip the explore problem. So, looking at this section, sign numbers are commonly used when discussing debt, cold temperatures, or poor stock performance. Sign numbers are commonly used when it says it again. This will allow us to find a result and learn the notation for writing computations. In the following table, you're going to read each problem statement and then complete the other columns. Use the example in the first row as a guide. So the first row has been done for us. So the first one says it is 34 degrees below zero, but the temperature will increase 12 degrees throughout the day. What will the temperature be at the end of the day? So what we have here is a number line describing what is happening. We start at 34 degrees below zero, so that implies that we are starting at negative 34. We then are looking at the fact that the temperature will increase. So that means that we're adding a number. So negative 34 plus 12 on the number line, we can see that it shows us that we would end at negative 22. The calculation is just writing what actually happened as an operation, so adding, subtracting, and so on. So we have negative 34 plus 12. And the result is that we have negative 22, and we are going to include that interpretation. So this means that it will be 22 degrees below zero at the end of the day. So for the next one that we're going to do together, it says, if a civilization began in 100 BC and lasted 400 years, when did it end? So thinking of your history lessons, we have two different ways of interpreting years. We have AD, which is what we're in now. So technically the year is 2021 AD. And then we have numbers that started before the year 1 AD. So we have BC. So BC is going to technically be represented as a negative number. So we're starting at negative 100, which is the same as 100 BC. So if we start at negative 100, we want to think which direction are we going from there if it lasted 450 years. So that would mean it would be going in the positive direction, because like if we started in the year 2000 and something lasted 5 years, we would end in 2005. So you would add on those 5 years. So for this, you're going to be adding 450 years in the positive direction. So I'm going to think of where that takes me for the year 0. So if I think of the distance between negative 100 and 0, that's 100. And I still have more years left to go. I still have to go 350 years. So that means that I'm going to end at 350 in the positive, which would be 350 AD. So looking at our calculation, we took negative 100 and added 450. Our final result was that we got 350. And our interpretation of it is that the civilization lasted until, sorry about that, my dog likes to bark a lot. The civilization lasted until the year, and let's represent 350 in terms of how we show that it was positive, which would be 350 AD. And the last one says the stock market has already lost 12 points for the day, but in the next hour drops 42.68 points more. What is the total loss for the day? Well, this is our first one where we see a number dropping or decreasing. So I'm going to start a little bit over here to give myself some room. And when it says it's already lost 12 points, that would be represented by a negative 12. And then we're going to show that it went a negative distance of 42.68. So it went that way. So we would end at a total of negative 54.68. Because if it already dropped 12 and it dropped this much more, that's a total loss of negative 54.68. So our calculation, we're still going to start with that number, the negative 12, but instead of adding a certain amount this time, we're going to be subtracting it. And we had our result as negative 54.68. And so that meant that in total, that's what we lost. So the stock market lost a total of 54.68 points. And in my interpretation, I did not write negative 54.68 because the word lost already implies the negative. So looking at how this works with adding integers, to add two numbers with the same sign, you're going to add the sizes and you're going to keep the sign. So if we add negative 15 and negative 40, we're going to add the sizes, which are 15 and 40, and keep the sign, which is negative. So we get a result of negative 55. And that goes the same if you were adding two positive numbers. So let's say we're adding 10 and 11. You would keep the sign and the sizes. So it would just be 21 like you already know. So to add two numbers with different signs, it's a little bit trickier. You're first going to take the number that's larger in terms of the size. So you're going to ignore the sign to begin with, and you're going to look at which number is larger and take away the smaller number. You're going to then keep the sign of the number that has the larger size. So you can think of this as whichever is farther from 0. So when you compare your numbers, you're comparing which one is farther from 0, and that is the sign that you're going to keep. When I am thinking of adding numbers that don't have the same sign, I like to think of, in the end, when I determine what sign, if it's positive or negative, the answer will be, I like to think of it as a tug of war between the positives and the negatives. The winner is going to be the number that's farther from 0. So here is an example. If we have negative 22 and 30, you're going to find the sum of the numbers. And to do that, you're first going to take and subtract the sizes. So when we think of negative 22 and 30, I'm going to take the number that's farther from 0 and subtract the other number from it. So we had 30 minus 22. We can see that that has a difference of 8. We are then going to find whichever number wins the tug of war battle of signs. So when we just look at which of these is farther from 0, it is 30, which is our positive number. So the positive won the tug of war. So that's why our answer is positive 8. So for each problem, we're going to compute the result without a calculator. If you are unsure how to proceed, put the problem in a familiar context such as money or temperature. One thing I want to note is during our notes and during our lesson, I do want you guys to be able to understand how to add and subtract positive and negative numbers without a calculator. But on your quiz and test, you can use a calculator. So looking at our first one, letter A, it has negative 58 plus negative 15, or sorry, plus negative 18. So we are adding numbers that have the same sign. So when it's the same sign, we're going to find the sum of the values. We're going to add them up. So we end up with 76. And then I'm going to keep the original sign. So my answer is negative 76. For B, this one you should kind of be scratching your head like, oh, I wonder why they have 58 plus 18. Well, they're both positive, so you should know the drill. Just add up your numbers and we get 76. It could technically be written as positive 76, but the natural way of doing it is just to write the 76. For C, on this one, you are adding numbers that have different signs. So these signs are different. So to do ones like this, you're going to take the number that's farther from 0. So this one is farther from 0. And you're going to subtract the other number. So I have 58 minus 18, and that gives me 40. I'm then going to go back to the original problem and look at which one wins the tug of war battle. So the tug of war battle was won by this number because it's farther from 0. So our final answer is a negative 40. For D, we're using the same numbers. So we're still, and they are also different signs. So we're still going to subtract to find the difference between them. And this time we're going to look at which number is farther from 0, and that would be the 58. But this time it's a positive value, so we get a positive 40. Okay, looking at the next topic is how to subtract integers. So the way that we're going to do this is instead of just treating it like an entirely new lesson, we're going to figure out how to change these to addition problems. So if you originally have it written as A minus B, you are going to change it to A plus negative B. If you originally have it written as A minus negative B, or A minus the opposite of B, you're going to change it to A plus B. And that's because subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So as an example, these are rewritten. They took negative 5 minus 10 and they rewrote it as negative 5 plus negative 10. And based on our rules from adding integers, we know that that will be negative 15. For the next one, they rewrote that one from 5 minus negative 10, and they rewrote it as 5 plus positive 10 as 15. So remember that a negative sign can be thought of interchangeably as negative or the opposite or subtraction. So they can all be replaced or substituted with the other. So for each problem, we're going to compute the result without a calculator, and just like before, on your quiz test, you can use a calculator. So, just like before, you can think of it in terms of money or temperature or use a number line to help you understand what to do with each problem. And for these, we are also going to convert subtraction problems to addition to make that even more helpful. So for letter A, we have negative 120 minus 7. So I'm first going to change this to addition. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 120, and I'm going to add a negative. Okay, so now we have our addition problem that we can use. So based on addition, these are the same sign. They are both negative. So I'm going to add the sizes together, and I get 127. And I'm going to keep the original sign, which was negative. So my answer is negative 127. For B, this one is already an addition problem, so I don't need to change it. These ones have different signs. So if I have different signs, I'm going to subtract the larger minus the smaller, and I get 43. The next thing I want to do is look at the tug of war, which one is going to win as far as positive or negative. So 54 would be farther away from 0 than negative 11, and that one is positive, so my answer is positive 43. For C, we also have different signs. So again, I'm going to think of subtracting first. So I'm going to take 72 minus 12, and I get 60. So the difference is 60. And we're going to look at which one is farther from 0. That would be the 72, and that is negative. So our answer is negative 60. The last one, D, we are going to change to addition. So remember from before that if you are subtracting a negative, it is the same as adding a positive. So this one changed to negative 72 plus 12. And if you look at letter C, you can see that it's actually the same exact problem. So we get the same answer as C, negative 60. For the next part, we're going to be looking at multiplying and dividing integers. All right, so you may have been thinking when we were doing the adding and subtracting, well, I feel like I remembered in school that a negative and a negative make a positive. Yes, for multiplication and division. So you were remembering the rules for multiplication and division. So if we multiply or divide two numbers with the same sign, the result is a positive. So a negative times a negative, we get a positive. If both of our numbers that we're dividing are negative, we get a positive. And if both the numbers are positive, like these, whether we're multiplying or dividing, we get a positive answer. If we multiply or divide two numbers with different signs, we get a negative number. So whether you have a positive times a negative, you get a negative, or if it's a negative times a positive. And the same goes for division. So let's go ahead and look at these examples. So this is a positive times a negative. So we're going to get a negative answer, and 7 times 10 is 70. Our answer is negative 70. For B, same idea. We have a negative times a positive. So the signs are different. So we get a negative answer, and 7 times 10 is 70. For C, this is a positive times a positive. So we get a positive 70 here. And for D, we have a negative times a negative. So they have the same sign. So this is also a positive 70. For E through H, all of these ones are just dividing, and the same rule applies. If the signs are the same, you get a positive. This one, though, is a negative divided by a positive, so we get a negative answer. 70 divided by 10 is 7, so this would be negative 7. This one is a positive divided by a negative, so we get a negative 7 there. This one is a positive divided by a positive, so we get a positive 7. And the last one is a negative divided by a negative, so we get a positive 7. This section has focused on performing operations with integers, but it's also important to understand how the set of integers relates to other types of numbers. I'm not going to go into much depth with this, and we're going to just skip this part and look at our example below, because you don't really need to understand all of these definitions in order for us to go through the next example. So this says to find all numbers that give a result of 25 when squared. And you don't recall from your previous classes, the meaning of when we square a number is when we use the exponent of 2. So if we were to think of the number 10 squared, 10 squared is 10 with the exponent of 2, which means it's 10 times 10. It's 10 multiplied twice. So we would end up with 100. So in this one, it wants us to find all numbers that if we square them, will give us the result of 25. So the most obvious answer is 5. If you square 5, you will get 25. However, there is another answer. And if we think of our lesson today, we've got positives and negatives. So what number will give us 25 as well when we square it? And that would be negative 5. Because when we square a negative, it's going to end up being a positive because it's a negative times a negative. Now, when you put this in your calculator, if you don't put parentheses around the 5, when you have your square, when you use your exponent, it's going to give you negative 25 as the answer. That's because your calculator, when it has this entered in it, it only applies the exponent to the 5. It doesn't include the negative as part of what's using the exponent. So our final answer for this one would be 5. 5 or negative 5. So looking at this section, what the point is, when performing a calculation involving signed numbers, we can use familiar context and pictures to make sense of the problem. So number lines can help a lot. To form the computation, we have to find both the size and the result, and its size of the result and its sign. If you understand the reasoning for procedures, you will have fewer rules to memorize, especially with adding and subtracting. So what did we learn? We learned how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide sign numbers, and also how to solve applied problems that involve sign number addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And in your homework, you will see some of these applied problems.